Don't you ever call yourself a designer again, Imani? Tonight, your sketches will belong to someone else, and you will go out the back door. Marcus, please. The main hall of the High Museum of Art glittered like a crystal box under hundreds of white stage lights, while cameras vied for the best angle of Chantal Dubois, the supposed breakout star of the season. Marcus stood beside her with a calculated smile, one hand on his lover's waist and the other raising a glass to the journalists. A few feet away, Imani silently watched the giant poster bearing Chantal's name, set against the backdrop of a dress she had sketched one winter morning, when she still believed her husband was sleeping in the next room. No one noticed her choked breath, until Marcus snatched the identification card from her neck and tore it in half in front of everyone. Some photographers lowered their cameras in discomfort. Others moved closer, drawn by the scandal. Imani, no, he shouted, looking at the two pieces of plastic on the floor, and then raising his eyes to the man who had promised to protect her work. This woman is not part of the creative team, Marcus announced, modulating his voice as if presenting a business report. She worked for a time as an external seamstress, and has since insisted on claiming ideas that were never hers. Chantal has spent months on this collection, and we will not allow the envy of a former employee to ruin her night. The two words, former employee, hit Imani harder than the previous act, because in front of her were several seamstresses who had sewn under her direction, suppliers who had received her emails, and critics who had discreetly praised her prototypes. Yet, no one intervened. Chantal bowed her head in feigned pity, draped in the ivory-colored dress that Imani had named Aurora. Hidden beneath the silk, in every fold, was a nearly invisible stitch in the shape of an I and an F. It was the secret signature Imani had placed on her pieces since her student years, a detail Marcus had never learned to recognize. Imani took a step toward Chantal and asked, with a calmness that worried even the security guards, why the embroidery inside each garment formed the initials IF. For a few seconds, the murmurs in the hall fell silent. A journalist from an Italian magazine looked up from his tablet. A French buyer asked for the question to be repeated. One of the models waiting behind a curtain instinctively brought a hand to the hem of her dress. Chantal turned pale, but Marcus stepped forward before she could answer. He said the letters stood for Future Line, the collection's commercial concept, and let out a laugh that no one echoed. Imani watched a drop of sweat run down his temple and understood she had hit a nerve. Even so, she did not pull out the documents she carried in her purse. Not yet. That night, she needed every dress to walk the runway, every camera to record it, and every potential buyer to hear the complete lie from Chantal's own lips. The guards approached, but before letting them take her away, Imani looked directly into the main camera and said that a collection can be stolen, but not the memory of the one who created it. No one fully understood the phrase, but several phones had already begun to record her. If this story moves you and you want to know how a quiet woman turned her humiliation into the evidence that would destroy those who betrayed her, join us until the end and subscribe so you don't miss any revelations. A few minutes later, as the music swelled and the first spotlight hit the curtain, Imani was led to a side corridor. Marcus believed he had expelled her from the only place where she could harm him. He did not know that Eleanor Vance, the event's creative director, had just received in her email a folder containing 117 original files, timestamps, registration contracts, and a single instruction: do not stop the show until the last dress has come out. 6 months earlier, Imani's studio occupied the brightest part of the penthouse she shared with Marcus in Buckhead. She had transformed an old living room into a small universe of suspended fabrics, muslin-draped mannequins, boxes of thread organized by tone, and a large oak table scarred by years of pencils and scissors. There, she worked from dawn until well past midnight on a collection she had called Rebirth, because each piece represented a stage of her life: the loss of her mother, the years of precarious jobs, the scholarship that had led her to study design, and the marriage she then considered her refuge. Marcus would often come in with a coffee and a kiss on her forehead, feigning admiration for a process that, in reality, made him impatient. He asked how much money those drawings would generate, which investors might be interested, and why Imani insisted on hiding the collection until it was finished. She interpreted his questions as anxiety. She did not see that behind each smile, he was calculating the value of what did not yet bear his name. Marcus had met Chantal at a dinner organized by an advertising agency. She had thousands of followers, a carefully constructed beauty, and an ambition she did not bother to hide. For years, she had modeled for small campaigns, but she believed she deserved her own brand. What she lacked was exactly what Imani possessed: a recognizable creative voice, technical discipline, and the patience to turn an idea into a real garment. Marcus soon discovered that he could offer her all of that without spending a dime, because he had access to his wife's studio, passwords, and trust. At first, he presented the connection with Chantel as a commercial opportunity. He told Imani that an influencer could attract investors and that perhaps they should invite her to see a few pieces. Imani gently refused. She did not want to show anything yet. That refusal did not cause a fight. Marcus kissed her, said he understood, and that very night, he secretly photographed the first sketches. In the following weeks, Imani began to notice small anomalies that were not enough to accuse anyone. A file cabinet she always left closed appeared shifted by a few centimeters. Test photos took longer to load from the cloud. Some papers had fingerprints on the edges, even though she worked with gloves so as not to stain them. When she asked Marcus, he replied that stress was affecting her memory and suggested she take a break. Then he offered to organize her documents, hire someone to digitize them, or save a copy on his company's server. Imani was grateful for the help, as she had been sleeping little for months, and wanted to believe her husband was sharing the burden. She did not know that he had already created a parallel folder with copies of each file, where he replaced dates, removed digital signatures, and prepared simplified versions so Chantel could pretend to understand the process. The betrayal did not enter her house by breaking down the door. It advanced slowly, using the keys she herself had handed over. One February afternoon, Marcus brought a bottle of wine to the studio and announced that he had found a viable solution to finance the show. According to him, a group of businessmen wanted to invest, but demanded that all communication go through a company with a more solid image. Imani hesitated. Her studio operated as a sole proprietorship, and she feared losing autonomy, although Marcus insisted it was a mere formality. He placed some documents on the table, marked with sticky notes where she had to sign, and assured her they only authorized him to negotiate the rental of the venue, suppliers, and financing. Imani read the pages, but did not detect that among them was a broad power of attorney to manage accounts and represent the studio before third parties. Marcus had prepared the package with the help of a consultant willing to look the other way. When she signed, he hugged her with a practiced tenderness. That night, he sent a text to Chantel. He could now move the money and hire the team. Rebirth would be yours before summer. Chantel began posting cryptic images from a loft in Midtown that Marcus had rented with the studio's money. She never showed a complete dress, only a sleeve, a texture, the reflection of a clasp, or the shadow of a mannequin. She accompanied each photo with phrases about courage, rebirth, and women who don't need permission. Imani found one of those posts while having breakfast, and felt a chill of recognition at the combination of blue velvet and gold stitching she had chosen for her third piece. She showed it to Marcus, who didn't even blink. He said those trends were everywhere and that Imani should stop imagining plagiarism every time someone used a similar color. Then he added that perhaps her obsession revealed a lack of confidence, a word he knew would hurt her. Imani closed her phone, ashamed, although something inside her remained on alert. That very afternoon, she discreetly changed the position of 3 folders and placed a nearly invisible red thread between the main drawer and the furniture frame. The next day, the thread was gone. Imani opened the drawer and checked that the folders were still there, but one of the central sheets was missing, the design for the final dress. A black piece whose internal structure was inspired by the G's bend quilts her grandmother used to make. It was the most personal model of the collection because she had started sketching it with her mother shortly before she passed away. Imani checked every surface, emptied boxes, lifted fabrics, and even searched the trash without finding it. Marcus arrived at dusk and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by documents. He listened to her explanation, frowned, and replied that she had surely put the sheet somewhere else. When Imani insisted, he raised his voice for the first time and claimed he could no longer stand her indirect accusations. Then he knelt, took her hands, and transformed his anger into concern, asking if she needed professional help to manage her anxiety. She ended up apologizing to him. However, as Marcus hung up his coat, Imani saw a purple stain on his shirt cuff. It was not common ink, but the dry pigment of a French chalk she used to mark dark patterns and kept only in the drawer where she had placed the missing design. The detail lasted only a second because Marcus rolled up his sleeves and headed for the kitchen, but it was enough for something to break inside her. Imani did not confront him. She waited for him to shower. She took the shirt from the laundry basket and photographed the stain under different lights. Then, she checked the building's security system records. The hallway camera showed Marcus entering the apartment mid-morning, even though he had told her he would be in Charlotte all day. He left 20 minutes later with a black portfolio tube under his arm. For the first time, suspicion was no longer a feeling but a sequence of events. Imani called Jamal Bryant, a college friend, an intellectual property lawyer. They hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not because of a fight, but because Marcus found any of his wife's male friendships uncomfortable and had managed to isolate her with petty excuses. Jamal listened in silence and asked her not to rush to accuse anyone. He reminded her that months ago she had sent him some files to register the preliminary designs, although the complete process had been stalled due to lack of time. Those first deposits could prove a creative lineage, but they needed to protect each piece before it was publicly presented. That night, Imani scanned drawings, photographed fabric samples, saved high-resolution versions, and wrote technical descriptions. Jamal prepared the registrations and used a provisional certification system that linked each file to a verifiable date. For 3 days, Imani pretended to work normally while, document by document, she built the defense she never imagined she would need against him. The effort to hide her fear began to transform her. She no longer left the original folders in the studio, but kept them in a safe deposit box under Jamal's name. She made encrypted copies, printed emails, and recorded every strange change in a notebook she always carried with her. She also installed a small camera aimed at her desk, not to spy on her husband, but to confirm what she still resisted accepting. The first recordings showed nothing. Marcus came in, left coffee, caressed her shoulder, and left. Imani had come to wonder if she was destroying her marriage over a coincidence. But on the 4th day, while she pretended to be at a doctor's appointment, the camera recorded Marcus closing the curtains, photographing 7 sketches, and connecting a device to the computer. Before leaving, he took the sample book, tore out 2 pages, and carefully wiped the table. Imani watched the video without crying. The pain was too precise to turn into tears. That same week, Marcus announced that the negotiations with the supposed investors had failed. He explained that no one trusted an unknown designer and suggested suspending the project for a year. Imani feigned disappointment and asked what would happen to the studio's money. He replied that he had used part of it to pay for market studies and that the rest was committed in contracts with suppliers. When she asked to review the accounts, Marcus acted offended. He claimed he had worked for free for months to help her and that her lack of trust was a humiliation. Then he left the apartment and spent the night with Chantel. Imani waited until dawn to access an old copy of the online banking. She discovered transfers to a company called CR Atelier, registered just 2 weeks earlier, and payments for rent, production, and public relations. The initials corresponded to Chantel Dubois. The money for Rebirth was financing the public launch of the woman who occupied the creator's secret place. Imani printed the transactions and took them to Jamal, who confirmed that the signed power of attorney allowed Marcus to operate, but not to appropriate funds for someone else's business. There were grounds for a claim, although proof of the link between CR Atelier and the registered designs was still missing. Jamal suggested filing a report immediately, but Imani asked for a few days. She knew that if Marcus felt threatened, he would hide the files, pressure the workers, and turn the matter into a marital dispute without witnesses. She needed to know the full scope of the plan. So she returned home, prepared dinner, and asked her husband if he still believed in her. Marcus looked her in the eye and replied that he would always support her, although perhaps she should accept that not all talented people are destined to succeed. Imani felt a mixture of revulsion and clarity. The man in front of her was not only stealing her designs, he was undermining her confidence so that when Chantel appeared with them, Imani would doubt her own right to complain. 2 days later, a black envelope with no return address arrived at the apartment. Inside was an invitation to a new designer's private presentation during Fashion Week. Chantel Dubois' name was printed in gold letters, and below it, the announcement of the Rebirth collection. Imani held the card in her hands for so long that its edges left marks on her fingers. On the back, someone had handwritten, "Come and learn what happens when a woman has the courage to show her ideas." She recognized Chantel's handwriting from notes she had seen on social media. It was not just a provocation, it was the confirmation that they both knew who the real author was. Marcus came in a few minutes later and feigned surprise at seeing the invitation. He said that perhaps Chantel had chosen the same title by chance and suggested Imani not attend to avoid an embarrassing scene. She looked up, smiled serenely, and replied that he was right, that it was not yet time to make a scene. That night, while Marcus slept, Imani placed the invitation next to the photo of the purple stain, the video from the studio, the bank transactions, and the certified registration records. For the first time, she could see the betrayal as a complete map. Pieces were missing, but the path led to a visible destination. Marcus planned to present his wife's work under his lover's name, sign commercial agreements, and then convince Imani to give up design forever. She turned off the light and stood by the window overlooking the Atlanta lights. She did not yet know how much she would lose before reclaiming her name, but she understood that silence can be a form of resistance when it is used to listen, document, and wait. In the bedroom, Marcus murmured Chantel's name in his sleep. Imani did not turn around. She put the folder in her purse and decided she would attend that show not as a spurned wife, but as an author who would let her thieves exhibit all the evidence before the world. The morning after receiving the invitation, Imani woke up before Marcus and found the apartment immersed in a strange silence, too clean for a home where two people still pretended to be a couple. She put the black card at the bottom of her purse, made coffee, and watched Marcus sleep with the serene face of someone who does not fear being discovered. For years, she had interpreted that tranquility as security. Now she understood it was impunity. When he opened his eyes, she asked him if he had rested and talked about the day with an almost perfect naturalness. He said he had to go to Charlotte for a financial meeting and would probably be back late. Imani nodded, although she already knew that the train ticket he had bought was not for Charlotte, but for another city where Chantel was attending a private gala to present her new image to some textile executives. She did not confront him, smiled, wished him luck, and waited to hear the door close before calling Jamal. At noon, Imani went to the old workshop where her prototypes were made. She found the roll-up door closed and a new sign, announcing renovations, although from inside came the unmistakable noise of industrial machines. She knocked several times until a young man in a black t-shirt and a CR Atelier ID opened. When he saw her, his expression changed. First, he seemed to recognize her and then pretended not to know who she was. Imani said she was looking for Brenda, but he replied that no one by that name worked there. Before closing the door, a door in the back opened and Imani caught a glimpse of a row of dresses covered with transparent bags. In one of them, she recognized the shoulder pattern of the Horizon model, a structure she had corrected 7 times so that the fabric would float without losing its shape. She also saw a woman quickly step back behind a screen. It was Brenda. Imani did not shout or try to force her way in. She just placed a hand on the door and said her name with such deep disappointment that the pattern maker had to lower her head. That same afternoon, Brenda called her from an unknown number and met her at a coffee shop near the train station. She arrived nervous, without makeup, and constantly looking towards the door. She confessed that Marcus had closed the original workshop alleging losses, and had then offered new contracts to almost the entire team through another company. He had assured them that Imani had sold the collection and abandoned the project for personal reasons. When Brenda expressed doubts, a lawyer showed her a power of attorney signed by Imani and warned her that disclosing information would lead to a lawsuit that could bankrupt her. The woman took a copy of the confidentiality agreement from her purse and slid it across the table. Imani recognized a signature that looked like hers. Although the slant of the letters did not match, Brenda began to cry. She said she did not want to betray Imani, but she needed to pay for her mother's nursing home. Imani took her hand and promised she would not blame her, although inside she felt that Marcus had turned her trust into a cage for everyone. The document Brenda delivered had something more disturbing than the false signature. In one of the clauses, it stated that CR Atelier had acquired from Imani Franklin the rights to exploit Rebirth for a sum she had never received. Jamal reviewed the copy that night and pointed out that it lacked annexes, notary seals, and bank references, so it was likely a contract prepared to intimidate the workers, not a valid transfer. However, the existence of the paper proved that Marcus was building a legal version of the lie. Imani remembered all the times he had asked her to sign packages of documents urgently and felt a cold fear. He could have used a real sheet to sandwich fake pages. Jamal advised her to review every text, power of attorney, and license granted during the marriage. He also warned her that Marcus might try to declare her unstable, incapable of managing the workshop, or responsible for its losses. Imani replied that he had already started, that every time she questioned something, he talked about anxiety, exhaustion, or jealousy. While Imani gathered documents, Chantel became a frequent presence in digital magazines, morning shows, and private receptions. She talked about her humble childhood, about nights of clandestine drawing, and about a sensitivity that, according to her, no one wanted to recognize until Marcus bet on her. Imani watched excerpts from those interviews and heard Chantel narrate memories that actually belonged to her life. The habit of sewing under the kitchen table, the first dress made from old curtains, the promise to a sick mother that one day she would make it to a major runway. They were not just limited to stealing lines and materials. They were appropriating her biography to give credibility to the brand. In one interview, Chantel showed a notebook with a coffee stain and claimed that rebirth had been born from it. Imani recognized the green cover of one of her lost diaries. The camera only focused for 2 seconds, long enough for an inside page to show a note written in her own hand. She recorded the entire program and sent a copy to Jamal. The next day, Imani discovered she could not access the workshop's banking platform. The password had been changed, and the recovery phone number belonged to Marcus. She also lost access to her business email, supplier files, and delivery calendars. When she called the bank, an employee informed her that her husband was listed as the representative, with full powers to manage the accounts, although any unusual transfer had to be justified. Imani requested a full statement and found payments to press agencies, stylists, hotels, and luxury car rentals for Chantel. There was even an invoice for jewelry used in a photo shoot. The total exceeded what she had saved in 5 years. At the end of the document appeared an even larger transfer under the concept of International Production Advance. The recipient was a company in Luxembourg linked to a textile conglomerate interested in acquiring the license. Imani understood that the runway show was not just an act of vanity. Marcus was preparing an operation capable of turning the theft into an irreversible business deal. Jamal requested commercial information and discovered that CR Atelier was registered under Chantel's name, but Marcus was listed as an authorized representative and beneficiary of some operations. They had built the company quickly, using the address of a management company and an initial capital almost identical to the amount withdrawn from Imani's workshop. They still could not access private contracts, but the trail was enough to request an injunction if they gathered proof that the exploited designs belonged to her. Jamal wanted to file the report immediately. Imani refused again, not out of fear, but because she feared that a premature action would allow Marcus to cancel the show, hide the garments, and claim it was all just another project. She needed the dresses to be seen, photographed, and publicly linked to Chantel. Every interview, every post, and every invitation increased the value of the evidence. Jamal watched her with concern and asked if she could bear to see another woman receive the applause for her life. Imani replied that she would endure one night of false applause to reclaim years of truth. Chantel, convinced that Imani was defeated, began to seek her out more directly. She called her from a private number and spoke with a venomous kindness. She said she was sorry Marcus hadn't known how to end his marriage before falling in love with her, and that perhaps it would have been less painful if Imani had accepted that some women are born to create in silence, while others have the courage to expose themselves. Imani activated her phone's recorder and asked her what she meant by create in silence. Chantel immediately corrected herself, claiming she was speaking generally, and then added that the invitation to the runway was still valid. She wanted Imani to witness the success she would never have achieved on her own. Before hanging up, she assured Imani that Marcus was preparing the divorce and that soon the apartment would no longer be hers either. That threat should have humiliated her, but it had the opposite effect. Imani understood that Chantel knew financial and legal details that only Marcus could have told her. The lover was not a passive instrument. She had consciously participated in the dispossession. That afternoon, Marcus arrived with a lawyer named Reginald Stone. Without asking permission, they spread some papers on the dining table. Marcus explained that the marriage had become unbearable and that a discreet separation would avoid a scandal harmful to both. He offered Imani a modest sum, temporary use of the apartment, and the possibility of keeping some of the workshop's machinery. In return, she had to renounce any claim on the business operations managed by him in recent months. Reginald spoke of emotional exhaustion, mismanagement, and debts that, he implied, could end up falling on Imani. She read each page without showing emotion. In one clause, they referred to Rebirth as an unfinished creative project of no commercial value. It was a clear contradiction. While Chantel presented it as the great collection of the season, Marcus tried to declare it worthless in the divorce. Imani asked for 24 hours to study it. Marcus smiled, sure that economic pressure would finally subdue her. When the men left, Jamal came to the apartment and photographed the entire document. He identified several abusive clauses and a waiver designed to block future actions for unlawful appropriation. He also discovered that Marcus intended to load Imani with a debt to suppliers that actually belonged to CR Atelier's production. If she signed, she would not only lose control of her work, but could end up paying for Chantel's launch. Imani finally felt the scale of the plan. Her husband wanted to turn her into the financial responsible for the theft, present her as a failed creator, and exit the relationship as a businessman who had saved a masterless idea. Jamal asked her to leave the apartment that very night, as he feared Marcus would destroy evidence or become more aggressive upon learning she had consulted a lawyer. Imani refused to flee. The studio contained traces that she might not be able to recover later. Instead of leaving, she backed up files, hid an encrypted memory stick, and prepared a small suitcase in case she had to leave immediately. 2 days later, a former assistant named Keisha contacted Imani through an anonymous account. She sent her photos of the new workshop, production lists, and screenshots of an internal group where Chantel gave instructions copied verbatim from Imani's notebooks. In some messages, Marcus corrected the workers when Chantel confused fabrics or proportions. In others, he ordered the removal of any original labels or marks that could link the garments to his wife. Keisha explained that she had saved the screenshots because she was afraid of being accused of falsification. She also revealed that several pieces had technical problems, as Chantel had modified details without understanding the original structure. A model had fallen during a fitting because they had changed the weight of a skirt without adjusting the internal support. Marcus ordered the incident to be hidden and blamed the seamstresses. Imani felt anger not just for the plagiarism, but because they were destroying her work and endangering others to maintain a facade. She promised Keisha she would protect her identity until she was ready to testify. That information allowed Jamal to outline a more solid strategy. If the garments still retained unique details described in the registrations, a technical comparison would be difficult to refute. Furthermore, the internal instructions proved that Marcus knew the origin of the designs and had actively directed the removal of marks. Imani reviewed each screenshot and noticed something that no one else had considered important. In the Aurora dress, Chantel had ordered the if embroidery to be covered with a silk ribbon. The message included a photo taken from inside the garment. The existence of that order proved that they had found her signature and had decided to hide it. Jamal smiled for the first time in days. He said that trying to erase an author's mark can be even more incriminating than leaving it intact. Imani asked him to notarize the images immediately, and then wrote to Eleanor Vance from a secure address. She did not tell the whole story, only asked what procedure the organization followed when there were doubts about the authorship of a collection. The response arrived an hour later. Any documented claim would be reviewed confidentially. Eleanor agreed to meet Imani in a private room of the museum. She was a woman of measured gestures, accustomed to hearing exaggerated promises from designers and agents. But her expression changed when she saw the first registration records. She compared the dates, the process images, and the technical details with the file Chantel had presented. In the latter, the descriptions were superficial and some photos appeared to be cropped from the previous files. Eleanor could not suspend a participant based solely on a conversation, although she admitted that the coincidences were serious. She offered to temporarily halt the show while a committee investigated. Imani surprised both Eleanor and Jamal by asking for the opposite. She explained that Marcus needed to complete the launch to sign contracts, and that if they canceled, he would claim the dresses were never presented or exploited. She wanted the organization to keep copies of all documents, record the order of appearance of the garments, and ensure that the official cameras recorded the entire collection. Eleanor agreed, but warned that the decision could destroy her emotionally. The pressure began to reflect on Imani's body. She slept few hours, ate poorly, and woke up believing she heard drawers opening in the studio. Marcus, meanwhile, alternated between contempt and an even more disturbing kindness. One day, he talked about the divorce as an inevitable liberation. The next, he prepared breakfast and recalled happy memories, trying to find out how much she knew. Imani understood that he was observing her, just as she was observing him. Every question was a test. Every silence could betray her. To protect herself, she pretended to accept the version that rebirth had failed. She put away fabrics, dismantled 2 mannequins, and said that maybe she would look for a job as a teacher. Marcus seemed to relax. He even offered to recommend her to a small academy, with the arrogance of one who bestows alms. That night, he called Chantel from the balcony and assured her that Imani had given up. She heard him from behind the curtain without moving. For the first time, she felt that her silence was not weakness, but the camouflage that allowed her to get closer to the truth. The silent confrontation between the two finally aroused Marcus's suspicions. One night, he returned earlier than expected, walked through the studio without turning on the lights, and discovered the small mark Imani had left next to one of the file cabinets. The next day, he ordered the servers to be changed, took documents from the apartment, and accelerated the signing of the divorce. Imani returned home before him and found the studio disturbed. Boxes, hard drives, and some invoices were missing. The hidden camera had been ripped from the wall, although the recording was stored automatically off-device. In the images, Marcus could be seen, accompanied by Reginald Stone, sorting papers and talking about cleaning up all traces before the show. They also mentioned a blue folder that had to be moved to a safe deposit box. Imani did not know what it contained, but the urgency of both suggested it could be important. Before leaving, Marcus looked directly at where the camera had been and said that when it was all over, no one would remember that Imani had ever drawn a line. The next morning, Marcus found Imani sitting in the dining room with the divorce papers. She had only signed the last page, but it was not the document he expected. It was a request prepared by Jamal to preserve the accounts, contracts, and records related to the workshop until their fate was clarified. Imani did not give it to him. She put it in her purse before Marcus could read it. She said she needed a few more days and that she would attend the runway show. He lost his patience, slammed his hand on the table, and claimed that Chantel would occupy the place that Imani had never known how to defend. Then he assured her that even if she had a few old drawings, she could not prove that the exhibited dresses were the same. Imani listened carefully, because as he spoke, he had inadvertently admitted that he knew of the existence of those sketches. Marcus realized it too late, and left the apartment without saying goodbye. Imani called Jamal and repeated every word. The runway was still weeks away, but the scandal had already begun in private. That night, Imani opened the box where she kept a sample of each fabric used in Rebirth. She ran her fingers over velvet, organza, and silk, as if touching the fragments of a life that others were trying to rewrite. For months, she had felt ashamed for not having discovered the betrayal sooner, but she began to understand that the fault lay with those who had used love as an access route. She could not change the moment she handed over the keys, signed the power of attorney, or believed Marcus's words, but she could decide what to do with what she had discovered. She organized the evidence into 3 groups: authorship, access, and exploitation. Then she wrote a chronology from the first sketch to the last transfer. By dawn, the complete story occupied 40 pages. On the cover, she placed a photo of the IF embroidery and a short sentence: "Truth does not need to be invented, it only needs to be preserved." She closed the folder and understood that she was no longer just fighting to reclaim a collection, but to prevent her silence from being used as consent. In the following days, Imani turned the living room into a clandestine archive. She laid out on the bed copies of contracts, bank statements, photos of prototypes, and screenshots of messages sent from CR Atelier. Each document proved a part of the deception, but a definitive link between the registered drawings and the garments that Chantel would present as her own was still missing. Jamal insisted that a judge could order an inspection, although a premature request would alert Marcus and allow him to replace labels, modify records, or hide original documents. Imani needed to find the blue folder mentioned in the recording. She was convinced that it held the international contract or some evidence that Marcus was afraid to leave in the apartment. She remembered that her husband had rented a safe deposit box at a private company for years. He had never explained what he kept inside. She had assumed it was family documents. Now she suspected it contained the economic heart of the betrayal. Jamal had requested from the court a restrictive measure to preserve bank transactions and commercial records without revealing the plagiarism accusation. While waiting for a response, he asked Imani to reconstruct the exact genesis of each design. It was not enough to claim the dresses were hers. She had to explain when the idea for each one was born, what changes she had made, and who had witnessed the process. Imani spent hours reviewing old photos and messages sent to the seamstresses. She discovered that almost all the garments had left a daily trail: a question about a zipper, the purchase of a button, the correction of a sleeve, or a photo taken in a mirror. Those details had seemed insignificant when they happened, but together, they formed a chronology that Chantel could never replicate. The fake designer had the drawings and the finished garments, but she did not possess the path between the two. She did not know why a pattern had been corrected, what error had forced the replacement of a fabric, or what personal memory had inspired each silhouette. Imani understood that authorship also resides in invisible decisions. The most important proof came thanks to a call from Brenda. The pattern maker had remembered that before the original workshop closed, Marcus had ordered several boxes to be moved to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. Among them was a gray trunk where Imani kept the first prototypes, the sewing patterns, and a large format notebook with handwritten notes. Marcus had assured the employees that everything would be destroyed because it belonged to a canceled collection. Brenda did not know if the trunk was still there, but she had kept a copy of the shipping order. Imani felt her heart beat faster. That notebook contained the first versions of Rebirth, test photos on mannequins, and small pieces of fabric pinned with pins. If it still existed, it would prove that the collection had evolved for months under her hand. Jamal warned that they could not enter the warehouse illegally. However, Brenda was still listed as an authorized employee of the company that owned the space and agreed to accompany them to request the return of personal items. The warehouse consisted of long metal corridors lit by fluorescent tubes. The manager checked Brenda's documentation and confirmed that some boxes had been picked up by a representative of Marcus 2 weeks ago, although others remained unclassified. After almost an hour, they found the gray trunk behind rolls of cardboard and wooden structures. The lock had been forced. Inside, some folders were missing, but the sample notebook was still hidden under a piece of muslin. Imani opened it with trembling hands. There were her mother's notes next to the sketch of the black dress, color tests, dated invoices, and snapshots where she appeared adjusting the first prototypes. Each page had corrections, measurements, and technical comments that could not have been improvised. Jamal asked no one to touch anything else until a notary arrived to make a record of the finding. Imani hugged the notebook to her chest, and, for the first time since discovering the theft, she let tears fall without shame. The notarial act recorded the state of the trunk, the shipping order, and every item recovered. Between the pages also appeared a sealed envelope that Imani did not remember having kept. Inside was an external memory and a note written by Keisha months ago. The assistant explained that she had made a backup before Marcus changed the access because she feared that the new management would delete important files. The memory contained successive versions of the designs, emails with suppliers, and photos taken automatically during the work process. When reviewing the data, Jamal discovered something decisive. Many files still retained the creation metadata, which identified Imani's computer and the modification history before CR Atelier legally existed. Some of the images that Chantel had included in her file were cropped copies of those documents. They even retained the username Imani Franklin in hidden layers. Marcus had changed the visible titles and dates, but he had not understood that the technical information remained embedded. The attempt at falsification carried within it the digital signature of the woman they intended to erase. Jamal hired a computer expert to examine the memory without altering its contents. The expert, Marta Quevedo, made forensic copies and compared the files with the records presented by Chantel to the organization. Her preliminary conclusion was compelling. The photos came from the same device. Some images had been exported from the program used by Imani, and some of Chantel's documents contained remnants of deleted layers where initials, comments, and original dates appeared. Marta explained that a digital file can be made up, although each modification leaves a trace. Marcus had been careful with what a journalist could see, but not with what an expert would analyze. She also found remote accesses to the workshop's computer made from an address associated with Chantel's apartment. That proved that the lover had personally opened and reviewed the documents. She could no longer present herself as a woman deceived by Marcus, who had received the designs believing them to be legitimate. She had entered multiple times into folders where Imani's name appeared explicitly. Eleanor received the preliminary report in a meeting held at midnight in the event's offices. She read the first pages without interrupting, and then closed the room's curtains. She confessed that Chantel had just delivered an updated version of her file, accompanied by an affidavit of authorship and a list of interested buyers. The show was going to be broadcast live to several countries, and the textile conglomerate planned to announce the acquisition of the license at the end of the night. If Imani was telling the truth, the event could become one of the biggest recent scandals in American fashion. Eleanor again offered to suspend Chantel's participation, but Imani maintained her decision. She needed the responsible parties to publicly claim the pieces as their own. Without that statement, Marcus would claim they were just shared prototypes within the marriage. Jamal supported the strategy with one condition. The organization had to keep the full recordings, document the appearance of each garment, and prohibit any piece from leaving the premises after the show without authorization. The risk increased when Reginald Stone sent Imani an official notice. He accused her of unauthorized access to CR Atelier's business information and demanded she hand over any copies in her possession. He also warned that disclosing data during the show would lead to a multi-million-dollar claim for reputational damage. The document mentioned screenshots and records that only Marcus could know she possessed. Imani understood that someone from the workshop had reported Brenda's questions or the meeting with Keisha. Jamal responded by denying the accusations and reminding them that many documents came from accounts belonging to Imani. However, the threat revealed that Marcus already felt the danger. That night, he arrived at the apartment with 2 employees of a security company. He said he needed to retrieve equipment belonging to the workshop and ordered the main computer to be taken away. Imani did not object, as Marta had already made a forensic copy. Marcus expected to see her desperate, but his wife's calm worried him more than any protest. Before leaving, Marcus asked her directly if she planned to appear at the runway. Imani replied that she had received an invitation and was looking forward to observing the work of a woman capable of creating a complete collection in a few months. He stood still, trying to decide if the phrase contained a threat. Then he claimed that marriages share ideas, relationships, and assets, and that it was absurd to talk about theft between 2 people who had built a life together. Imani reminded him that sharing requires consent. Marcus changed his tone and assured her that Chantel had the face, energy, and influence necessary to sell what Imani would never have known how to defend. According to him, he had saved designs condemned to remain in a drawer. Those words confirmed his true logic. He did not deny having taken the collection, but attributed himself the right to do so because he despised its author. Imani kept her voice steady and asked him why, if he was so sure, he had needed to forge contracts. Marcus did not answer and left the house, slamming the door. The conversation had been recorded by Imani's phone, placed face down on the table. Jamal listened to the audio several times and pointed out that Marcus had made an implicit admission. That alone was not enough to close the case, but it reinforced the entire body of evidence. Even so, something still worried him: the contract with the international conglomerate. If Marcus managed to sign it before any intervention, he could move the money, hide the funds, or create rights in third countries. They needed to obtain a copy without breaking the law. Eleanor suggested a viable path. As an organizer, she had received a commercial summary that included the name of the conglomerate's representative, Etienne Moreau. Imani requested a confidential meeting and showed him only the copyright registration records, without revealing the entire strategy. Moreau reacted with skepticism and then with alarm. His company had advanced a significant amount of money based on an originality guarantee signed by Chantel and Marcus. If the collection was stolen, they could also be victims of fraud. Moreau gave Jamal a copy of the pre-contract. In its annexes was a statement in which Chantel guaranteed having created each design without external collaboration. Marcus was listed as a witness, commercial representative, and responsible for verifying the rights. The operation included a clause that would release the second payment immediately after the show, once the garments were publicly exhibited. That clause explained the urgency and the decision to expel Imani from the event. They needed the show to end without any visible claim. The document also revealed that Marcus planned to divert part of the funds to an offshore company. Moreau agreed to freeze the payment, although he asked to maintain an appearance of normality so as not to alert them. For the first time, Imani saw fear appear on the other side. Marcus was no longer just facing a wife he had humiliated. He had deceived investors, falsified guarantees, and compromised the reputation of an international company. The stage he had built to crown Chantel was beginning to become a trap. Meanwhile, Chantel intensified her public campaign. She gave an exclusive interview in which she described the black dress as the expression of the loss of her mother. Imani had to stop the video when she heard those words because they belonged to the most intimate memory of her life. Her mother had drawn with her the first lines of the structure inspired by the quilts, and had asked her to finish it one day. Chantel was not just using the design, she was turning another woman's pain into an advertising story. Imani felt the urge to publish the evidence immediately, but Jamal reminded her that an emotional reaction could allow the responsible parties to claim it was defamation and present themselves as victims. Instead of responding, Imani added to the file a photo of her appearing with her mother working on that same sketch, dated 7 years earlier. She also saved a recording in which her mother commented on the idea of the dress. That piece was no longer just intellectual property, it was a family memory that Marcus had sold without understanding its value. Keisha finally agreed to testify before a notary. She explained that Chantel did not know how to pattern, was ignorant of basic sewing concepts, and received prepared answers before each interview. Marcus had hired technicians to teach her simple phrases, although she lost her patience every time a question deviated from the script. Keisha also recounted that during a fitting, Chantel had found the initials "if" inside several garments and had ordered them removed. Marcus ordered some to be covered with tape, others to be unstitched, and 2 to be kept intact because he feared damaging the fabric. The assistant remembered they were the Aurora dress and the final black dress. Imani asked Eleanor to ensure those pieces were presented without further modification. The director discreetly assigned a supervisor to photograph the inside of each dress as it arrived at the venue. When the first garments were registered, the initials appeared exactly where Keisha had indicated. The images were notarized with date, time, and inventory number. The thieves had brought to the stage the signature they had tried to erase. The blue folder was still missing. The opportunity arose when Brenda remembered the name of the courier company used to move documents from the apartment. Jamal obtained the delivery record through a court request. The package had been deposited in Marcus's private safe deposit box, but it did not only contain contracts from CR Atelier. The manifest described original documents from Imani's workshop, bank powers of attorney, and some forms signed in blank. The judge authorized the preservation of the contents before the risk of destruction, although Marcus would be notified after the opening. In the presence of a court clerk, they found the blue folder next to seals, signature copies, and contract drafts. Inside was a false version of the transfer of Rebirth, prepared to pretend that Imani had sold all rights for a ridiculous amount. The signature came from another sheet and had been digitally inserted. A list titled Exit Plan also appeared, in which Marcus had noted the steps to get a divorce, load his wife with debts, and move the profits abroad. Imani read the list without changing her expression until she reached a sentence written in the margin. After the show, she won't be able to prove anything. For months, she had wondered if Marcus acted out of ambition, for love of Chantel, or out of contempt for her. The folder answered cruelly. Everything had been calculated. He planned to take advantage of her signature, drain the studio, discredit her mental health, and erase the origin of the garments before abandoning her. Jamal explained to her that the finding could justify criminal actions for falsification, embezzlement, and fraud. However, the procedure had to be kept secret until the authorities secured accounts and equipment. Imani closed the folder and asked to keep a certified copy of that page. She no longer sought to convince her husband to confess, nor did she expect him to show remorse. The truth was written in his own hand. The only thing Marcus still controlled was the public stage. For that very reason, Imani decided to take it away at the moment he considered his greatest triumph. 3 days before the show, Marcus received a notification that some accounts were under review. He called Imani several times, but she did not answer. Then he appeared at Jamal's small apartment, where she was staying temporarily. From the intercom, he demanded to speak with his wife and assured her they could reach an agreement before they both lost everything. Jamal refused to let him in. Marcus shouted that Imani did not understand the business world and that no proof would change the fact that Chantel was now the recognized face of Rebirth. Imani heard him from the stairs without approaching. She knew he was trying to provoke her to find out how much she knew. Finally, Marcus left a note under the door. If she appeared at the event, he would publicly reveal her supposed emotional problems and show medical reports that proved her instability. Imani recognized the name of the clinic. She had gone there once for insomnia, accompanied by him. She understood that even that consultation had been prepared as part of his future defense. Jamal investigated the reports and discovered that Marcus had requested the copies using the general power of attorney of the workshop, although he did not have access to health information. The doctor had never diagnosed a mental illness, only recommended rest for stress. However, Reginald had drafted a manipulated summary in which he turned exhaustion into incapacity. Imani felt a fear of being humiliated in front of the cameras, but she no longer hesitated. She prepared a brief statement and requested an authenticating certificate from the clinic. She also asked Marta, Brenda, Keisha, and Moreau to be present at the show, although no one was to intervene before receiving a signal. Eleanor had designed a procedure to change the content of the screens without Chantel's team knowing. Imani's files would be housed in a separate system and would only be projected when the last dress appeared. Everything depended on resisting until then. One mistake, one doubt, or one leak could lead Marcus to withdraw the collection and escape with what he still controlled. The night before the event, Imani visited the empty venue. She walked the runway while the technicians tested the lights and heard the echo of her steps on the white surface. For years, she had imagined that moment completely differently. Her name on the screens, her mother in the front row, and Marcus watching her with pride. None of that would exist. Instead, she would enter as a discredited woman, see his lover wear her memories, and allow her husband to deny her identity. Eleanor approached and asked her for the last time if she wanted to cancel. Imani looked at the curtain behind which hung the 18 dresses registered under Chantel's name. She replied that the theft needed to be fully displayed so that no one could call it a misunderstanding. Then she asked to see the black dress. Inside it, she found the IF stitches still intact. Next to them, almost erased, a small purple stain of the French chalk still remained. Imani understood that the stain itself had traveled the entire path of betrayal, from the open drawer in her studio to Marcus's cuff, from the stolen pattern to the final garment. She photographed the detail and carefully closed the dress. As she left the venue, she received a text from Chantel with an image of the illuminated stage. The lover wrote that she hoped to see Imani among the audience, so she could learn how to turn a weak idea into an empire. Imani did not reply. She put away her phone, hugged the certified copy of the blue folder to her chest, and looked one last time at the doors of the palace. The next day, Marcus and Chantel would tell their story to buyers, journalists, and international cameras. She would let them speak, smile, and claim every detail. Then, when the last dress touched the runway, the dates, the voices, the files, and the witnesses would speak for the woman they believed they had erased. The night of the show, Atlanta seemed determined to illuminate every lie. The High Museum of Art was surrounded by black cars, cameras, and assistants running with earpieces, while guests presented their IDs under a light drizzle. Imani arrived alone, wearing a plain gray suit and carrying only a small purse where she kept certified copies of the registration records, the clinic's statement, and the exit plan page. She did not need to draw attention. She knew that Marcus had prepared the stage to exhibit her as a resentful woman. As soon as she crossed the hall, 2 security guards received an order by radio and stood in front of her. Marcus appeared with Chantel, who was wearing the Aurora dress and smiling for the photographers. Without lowering his voice, he snatched Imani's ID, tore it, and declared that this woman was not a designer, but a former seamstress who could not accept that Chantel had turned vague ideas into a real collection. For a few seconds, the hall was filled with murmurs and flashes. Chantel bowed her head in feigned pity, while Marcus placed a protective hand on her back, playing for the cameras the role of a man defending a harassed creator. Imani watched the dress and asked the question she had been holding back for weeks: why the embroidery inside each garment formed the initials IF. An Italian journalist asked to see. A French buyer consulted the file. 2 models looked at each other nervously behind the curtain. Chantel replied that they meant future line, but she pronounced the phrase with a lack of confidence that no press campaign could hide. Marcus ordered the guards to escort Imani to the service exit. She did not resist. Before leaving, she looked at Eleanor, who was standing by the production desk, and tapped the lock of her purse twice. It was the agreed signal. The show had to begin. The cameras had to keep recording, and no one was to take a single garment. Eleanor led Imani through a private corridor instead of expelling her from the building. She had arranged for her to stay in a small technical room from which she could see the stage on multiple screens. Jamal, Marta, and a notary were waiting there with the documents organized by order of appearance. Moreau sat among the buyers, feigning normality while his company kept the second payment frozen. Brenda and Keisha had entered as part of the sewing team, protected by the organization and ready to testify when they received the signal. Imani took a deep breath as she saw the first dress advance down the runway. Each piece bore a label with the name Chantel Dubois, although it also retained the decisions that only its author could explain. Eleanor reminded her that she could still stop everything. Imani shook her head. She needed Chantel to publicly describe the collection, Marcus to ratify the rights, and the buyers to hear their guarantees. The truth could not interrupt the lie before it identified itself. The music started, and Chantel sat in a chair next to Marcus in front of the press. A presenter announced that Rebirth was the work of a new female voice, capable of combining tradition and modernity. On the screens appeared quotes from Imani's notebooks, now signed by Chantel. The first model, Horizon, came out under a blue light. Then came Threshold, Root, and Aurora. Imani recognized in each movement the nights of work, the corrected mistakes, and the conversations with her mother. However, the sewing showed small changes ordered by Chantel to feign creative participation. A sleeve fell too stiffly. A skirt had lost its balance. Some embroideries had been covered with ribbons. Those imperfections hurt her, but they also proved the distance between copying an appearance and understanding a structure. In an interview broadcast live from the front row, Chantel claimed that she herself had developed all the patterns. Marta marked the exact time of the statement and saved the video. Every word spoken turned the deception into a verifiable assertion. When the 10th dress appeared, a reporter asked Chantel about the technique used to hold an asymmetrical skirt without altering its drape. Chantel responded with a vague phrase about freedom and movement. The journalist insisted, referring to the type of lining and the internal weight system. Marcus intervened, saying that an artist is not obliged to explain every technical secret. The response provoked discreet smiles among several professionals. Imani had asked Eleanor that certain questions arise naturally, without revealing the claim. It was not about setting an artificial trap, but about testing if the supposed author could describe her own work. Chantel confused organza with gauze, attributed a hand embroidery to a non-existent machine, and claimed that the root dress had been designed after a trip to a city on a date for which there were already certified registrations. Marta recorded every contradiction. The public did not yet know the truth, but the perfect image of the new designer was beginning to crack in the eyes of those who understood the trade. In the dressing rooms, Keisha discovered that Reginald Stone was trying to remove 2 boxes of documents and several garment bags before the show ended. He said that Chantel had decided to change the order of the show, although he did not have a permit. Eleanor's supervisor blocked the door and demanded to inventory the material. Inside a box appeared, the ribbons used to cover the embroideries along with cut threads where fragments of the initials IF could still be distinguished. They also found old labels from Imani's workshop and a list with instructions to replace them. The notary recorded the finding while Reginald protested, claiming it was private property. Eleanor replied that any item brought in as part of a disputed collection had to remain on the premises until its origin was clarified. Reginald called Marcus. From the monitors, Imani saw her husband leave the front row for a few seconds, hear the news, and lose his color. He returned next to Chantel, trying to keep his smile, but he no longer touched her. A distance appeared between them that they had previously known how to hide. With 3 dresses to go, Marcus demanded to speak privately with Eleanor. The director came with a legal representative of the event. He claimed that Imani was suffering from a dangerous obsession, that she had falsified evidence, and that she could cause an incident. He took out of a folder the medical summary manipulated by Reginald and demanded she be permanently expelled. Eleanor read the document without reacting, and then showed him the authenticating certificate sent by the clinic, which only recorded an episode of insomnia related to work stress. She also informed him that Marcus's access to those data was under investigation. He tried to snatch the papers, but a security officer intervened. Eleanor warned him that any further attempt to remove the garments, threaten witnesses, or alter records would force her to suspend him publicly. Marcus understood that Imani had not come alone or improvised out of resentment. She had built a protective network around each piece of evidence. Even so, he returned to his seat, confident that he could still control the narrative if the international contract was announced before the revelation. When the black dress finally appeared, the model advanced to the center of the runway, and the music stopped. The screen stopped showing Chantel's logo and displayed the first sketch of that garment, dated 7 years earlier. Then came the photos of Imani next to her mother, the pages from the sample notebook, the invoices, the pattern corrections, and the time-stamped files. The public stood still. The sequence continued with versions of each design, always before the registration date of CR Atelier. Marta had prepared a visual comparison where the images from Chantel's file matched exactly with Imani's original files, including cuts and hidden layers. Finally, the video of Marcus entering the studio, photographing the sketches, and connecting a device to the computer was projected. No one applauded or said anything. The cameras turned towards him. Marcus stood up and shouted that the material was manipulated, but his voice became small in the hall. Then, the screen showed the order to cover the IF initials, followed by the notarized photos from inside the Aurora dress and the final dress. Chantel tried to leave her seat, but Eleanor took the stage and asked her to stay for a few minutes to clarify an issue of authorship. She did not accuse her or use grandiloquent words. She simply asked her when she had created the black dress, why she had chosen that structure, and how she had solved the problem of internal support. Chantel repeated the story of her mother's death. Eleanor showed an old interview where Imani talked about the same design next to a family photo dated years before the 2 women met. Then she asked Chantel to identify a technical detail indicated in the pattern. She fell silent. A veteran designer from the front row replied that it was a structure inspired by the veins of quilts. Imani had explained it in the original notebook with drawings and calculations. Chantel looked at Marcus expecting help, but he turned away. At that moment, everyone understood that the supposed creator could not defend the story, the technique, or the process of what bore her name. Brenda then appeared from the side of the stage. With a trembling voice, she stated that she had worked for Imani for 4 years and that every pattern of rebirth was developed under her direction. She explained how Marcus had closed the workshop, moved the staff, and assured them that Imani had sold the designs. She showed the confidentiality agreement and the false signature used to intimidate them. Keisha joined her and confirmed that Chantel received prepared answers, confused materials, and had ordered the initials to be removed. The notary handed Eleanor the record of the finding made in the dressing room. Next, Moreau stood up among the buyers and announced that his conglomerate was suspending all operations with CR Atelier due to possible false declarations about the collection's ownership. Marcus tried to interrupt him, claiming the rights belonged to the marriage and that he had financed the production. Jamal replied from the stage that managing someone else's funds does not make one an author and that there were already legal measures to preserve accounts, contracts, and equipment. The attention shifted to Imani when Eleanor invited her to come up. She walked slowly down the runway, without music or introductions, while the public stepped back to let her pass. When she reached the black dress, she carefully opened a part of it and showed the F stitches. The marks of the thread where someone had tried to remove them were still visible. Imani did not give a speech of revenge. She said that those initials were not a commercial strategy, but a habit learned from her mother. She placed them in invisible places because she believed that a garment should retain the memory of the one who built it, even if no one saw it. Then she explained that she had allowed the show to go on because she needed every dress to be publicly presented under a false authorship before delivering the evidence. Marcus called her a manipulator and claimed she had prepared a humiliation. Imani looked at him without raising her voice and replied that he himself had chosen the stage, the cameras, and the lie. She had only brought the dates that proved who came first. Desperate, Marcus took the stage and demanded the photographers turn off their cameras. He assured them it was all a marital dispute and that Imani intended to destroy a company out of resentment. Jamal then showed the false transfer contract found in the blue folder along with the exit plan page. On the screen appeared the phrase written by Marcus. After the show, she won't be able to prove anything. The silence turned into a murmur of indignation. Reginald tried to leave the venue, but 2 officials waiting by the entrance asked him for identification and retained his devices. There was not a spectacular scene or handcuffs in front of the cameras. It was something more disturbing for the responsible parties. Every exit was being closed with documents. Marcus looked around for support from sponsors, clients, and journalists. The same people who had congratulated him minutes before now avoided his gaze. Chantel retreated towards the dressing rooms, discreetly carrying a phone and a yellow purse that was not part of her outfit. Imani saw the move and alerted Eleanor. But before security arrived, Chantel had locked herself in a private dressing room. From inside, she called someone and asked for a car to pick her up at the supplier's entrance. She also tried to move money from a banking app, unaware that the accounts were already blocked. When she received an error message, she began to throw objects and accuse Marcus of having used her. Keisha, who was in the hallway, heard Chantel say that she still had an account abroad and had no intention of staying to pay for someone else's crimes. Security opened the door with Eleanor's authorization. They found a passport, an electronic plane ticket for a midnight flight, and a small memory stick hidden in a makeup case. Chantel claimed it was a business trip, although the prepared luggage and the deleted messages told a different story. The memory stick was handed over to the notary without being opened. Marcus arrived at the dressing room and, upon seeing the plane ticket, understood that his lover had her own plan to leave without him. The argument between the two completely destroyed the image they had built. Marcus demanded to know where the advance money was, and Chantel replied that he had promised to protect her, not turn her into the one responsible for the forgeries. He revealed that the idea of presenting herself as a designer had been hers. Chantel replied that she could never have accessed the files without the passwords, signatures, and powers of attorney he had given her. Each accusation was recorded by security cameras and several phones. Imani stood at the other end of the hallway, understanding that she no longer needed to force them to confess. The alliance based on the desire to erase another had disintegrated as soon as both feared having to pay the price. Reginald tried to stop the argument, but Chantel pointed at him and assured that he himself had prepared the false contracts. Marcus called her a liar and mentioned a secret transfer made that same week. Jamal asked that no one touch the devices. The memory stick found in the makeup case could contain a parallel accounting or communications that linked all 3. When they returned to the hall, the show had been officially suspended, and the garments remained under guard. The journalists surrounded Eleanor, Moreau, and the legal representatives. Imani avoided a long interview. She only affirmed that she had registered her work before it was presented by third parties, and that she trusted the authorities to clarify the responsibilities. Her serenity contrasted with the chaos of Marcus and Chantel. However, the victory was not yet complete. Jamal told her in a low voice that part of the advance had left the accounts days before the block, and that they still did not know where it was. There was also a risk that Marcus would try to blame the entire operation on Chantel and Reginald. To prove his direct control, they needed to examine the found memory stick and the retained devices. Imani looked at the dresses standing still under the lights. She had publicly reclaimed her name, but the man who had orchestrated the theft was still looking for a way to turn the truth into a new lie. Shortly after midnight, Marta connected the memory stick to an isolated device in the presence of the notary. The content was encrypted, although in the main folder appeared an unprotected text file. It contained a list of transfers, account numbers, and an instruction to leave the country after the show. Next to Chantel's name was another beneficiary, identified only by the initials AM. Marcus claimed that anyone could have created that document, but Marta checked and saw that it had been modified from his personal computer 2 nights before. More worryingly, there was a folder program to self-delete upon connecting the memory to the internet. The expert stopped the process and began a forensic recovery. In the first recovered image, Marcus appeared signing in front of Reginald a guarantee of authorship that he knew was false. In the second, Chantel was holding Imani's green notebook, while they both toasted. Imani closed her eyes for a moment. There was no longer room for the version of the deceived husband. Before the review ended, one of the employees reported that Chantel had tried to leave through the parking lot using a model's ID. She had been retained in the building for identification and to ensure she did not take evidence, although there was not yet an arrest warrant. Marcus then received a text on his phone. It was a copy of Chantel's flight reservation and a sentence sent hours before to an unknown person. When the runway ends, he will be left with the scandal and we will have the money. Marcus looked up at the woman for whom he had destroyed his marriage and understood that he too had been included in a plan of abandonment. Rage replaced fear, but Imani no longer felt satisfaction. What she saw was not yet justice, but the collapse of 3 people linked by greed. Jamal put the phone in an evidence bag and told her that the next morning would be decisive. Imani looked at the black dress, motionless under the last light of the stage, and knew that the truth had just turned its back on those who believed they could use it. The morning after the show, images of the scandal dominated digital front pages, television shows, and social media. The name Chantel Dubois, presented for months as an icon of a new generation of designers, now appeared next to words like plagiarism, forgery, and fraud. The most shared videos did not show dresses or celebrities, but the moment the screens projected Imani Franklin's sketches, followed by the recording of Marcus entering the workshop. Journalists repeated the same question. How could such a large campaign be organized with a stolen collection, without anyone verifying its origin beforehand? Imani watched the news from Jamal's office, still wearing the clothes from the night before. She had imagined that publicly reclaiming her name would bring her immediate relief, but she felt a strange mix of fatigue, sadness, and emptiness. The truth was out. However, the years of broken trust could not be restored with newspaper headlines. Chantel had been allowed to leave the venue after handing over her devices and providing a contact address, as the investigation was still in its early stages. She assured that she would remain in Atlanta and collaborate with the authorities. Less than 6 hours later, Keisha alerted Imani that she had seen a photo on social media taken by a fan at the airport. Chantel appeared with sunglasses, a small suitcase, and a coat that partially covered her face. Jamal communicated this information to those in charge of the case. When Chantel reached the boarding control for a flight to a distant destination with a stopover, she was retained to clarify the origin of the funds used and her failure to remain contactable. Inside the suitcase, they found another memory stick, printed contracts, and some of the jewelry purchased with money from Imani's workshop. Chantel claimed she was only trying to get away from the media pressure, but she was carrying enough documents to start a new life. The second memory stick contained the missing conversations. Chantel had saved copies because she had never fully trusted Marcus. In the messages, he detailed exactly how to obtain the sketches, change the access, use Imani's old signatures, and file for divorce after the launch. He also talked about discrediting her in front of the workers and investors, taking advantage of her episodes of exhaustion to present her as a woman incapable of managing a business. Chantel not only accepted the plan, She proposed deadlines, chose which personal memories to appropriate, and demanded the removal of any mark that could reveal the true authorship. In one audio, she could be heard laughing while saying that Imani would end up having to see her own dresses from the street. Marcus replied that once the press associated rebirth with the right face, no one would listen to a spurned wife. That phrase destroyed the last defense he was trying to build. He could no longer say he had acted out of love, out of financial confusion, or out of a desire to save an abandoned work. The goal had been to deliberately erase its creator. Reginald Stone tried to distance himself from both. He claimed that he had only prepared documents based on the information provided by his clients and was unaware of the signature forgeries. However, the recovered drafts showed comments written by him, instructions to insert pages into old contracts, and recommendations on how to use Imani's medical consultation to question her credibility. Invoices for services never declared also appeared. Faced with the possibility of bearing all the responsibility, Chantel voluntarily handed over messages in which Reginald warned that the false transfer would not withstand a legal review, but would be enough to scare the staff and buyers for a few weeks. That margin was exactly what they needed to hold the show, receive the advance, and move the profits. The plan did not depend on creating a perfect lie, only that it lasted until the money left the country. Imani understood that her decision to wait until the runway had prevented the operation from concluding at the intended time. Marcus was summoned to testify and arrived with a new lawyer. He had changed his strategy. He no longer denied that the sketches came from Imani's workshop, but claimed to have believed they belonged to the marital property. According to his version, his wife had abandoned the project and he had decided to commercialize it to recover the invested money. He presented Chantel as an opportunist who had deceived him, assuring that it was she who had wanted to appear as the author. The testimony did not last long before it began to contradict itself. If he considered the collection marital property, why did he forge a transfer? If Imani had abandoned it, why did he hide the show from her? If Chantel had deceived him, why did he appear directing the removal of the initials and personally guaranteeing authorship? The blue folder, the messages, and the security videos answered before he could finish each excuse. Imani heard part of that testimony from an adjoining room. Marcus requested to speak with her without lawyers and promised to provide information about the foreign accounts if she agreed to withdraw some of the charges. Jamal recommended rejecting the meeting, but Imani decided to see him one last time in the presence of the legal representatives. Marcus entered with a face aged by a night of public exposure. He sat across from her and, for a few seconds, tried to regain the intimate tone he had used throughout the marriage. He said that everything had gotten out of hand, that Chantel had pressured him, and that he only wanted to prove the commercial value of Imani's work. He claimed he had always believed in her talent, although he feared her shyness would destroy any opportunity. Imani listened to him without interrupting until he assured he had acted for both of them. "You didn't steal my dresses because you believed in me," she replied. "You stole them because you believed my talent was worth more without my name." Marcus lowered his head, but did not show remorse. He asked what Imani would gain by destroying him, reminding her that they had shared a home, plans, and years of marriage. She opened the certified copy of the exit plan and pointed to the line where he had planned to load her with debts and declare her incapacitated. She told him that the marriage had ended long before the runway, exactly on the day he decided to use her trust as a tool against her. She was not seeking to destroy him. She refused to continue protecting him from the consequences of his own actions. Marcus offered to sign the divorce, return the shares, and hand over the remaining money. In return, he wanted Imani to publicly state that Chantel was the sole person responsible for the plagiarism. She stood up without answering. Before leaving, she told him that he had spent months trying to convince her that her memory was not reliable. Now he would have to face records that remembered every step better than either of them. The legal measures allowed the freezing of accounts, the recovery of part of the advance, and the securing of assets purchased with the workshop's funds. Not all the money appeared immediately. Some transfers had passed through intermediary companies and required international cooperation. However, Moreau provided the complete invoices and collaborated to identify the route of the payments. The textile conglomerate canceled the pre-contract and announced that it would not claim the designs while the authorship was being resolved, officially recognizing Imani as the registered creator. Several magazines corrected their previous articles and removed Chantel's promotional interviews. Some media tried to turn Imani into a tragic figure or a vengeful wife, but she rejected that narrative. She did not want to be known only as the woman who was stolen from. She had been working for years before Marcus and would continue to create after him. Her story did not begin with the betrayal and should not end with the scandal. The workers of CR Atelier were summoned to testify. Most confirmed that they had received orders to hide the origin of the designs, although some claimed to have believed there was a legitimate transfer. Imani asked Jamal to distinguish between those who participated consciously and those who acted under economic pressure. Brenda, Keisha, and several seamstresses feared losing their jobs or being publicly associated with the fraud. Instead of abandoning them, Imani proposed restructuring the old team under a new structure, with transparent contracts and clear recognition for each technical responsible. She knew that Rebirth had not been created entirely alone. The sketches were hers, but many hands had turned the lines into garments. Marcus and Chantel had used the silence of those hands as protection. Imani decided to make them a public part of the truth. Eleanor offered to organize a second show of the collection, this time under the legitimate name of Imani Franklin. At first, she hesitated. She feared that another show would seem like a commercial exploitation of the scandal, and that the public would attend only out of morbidity. Eleanor explained to her that the first runway had been interrupted and associated with a lie. The garments deserved to be displayed in the conditions imagined by their author, not to remain forever as items of an investigation. Moreau committed not to participate as a buyer until all rights were fully clarified. Brenda offered to restore the removed embroideries and correct the changes made by Chantel. Gradually, the idea no longer seemed like a repetition, but a reparation. Imani agreed on one condition. The show would not present a solitary designer, but the entire team that had built Rebirth. The temporary workshop filled with activity. The seamstresses removed ribbons, restructured linings, and returned the balance to the altered dresses. Every time they found a cut thread or a replaced label, they documented the damage before repairing it. Imani decided to keep a small mark on the black dress, the purple stain of the French chalk. Brenda wanted to clean it, but she refused. That mark belonged to the journey of the piece. From the studio where it was stolen to the stage where it reclaimed its name. It should not dominate the garment, but neither should it disappear. During the fittings, Imani felt again the joy of unsupervised work. No one told her to doubt, to rest, or to delegate management to someone more capable. For the first time in a long time, she could make mistakes without wondering if someone else would use them to declare her incompetent. Chantel, faced with the mounting evidence, agreed to cooperate to mitigate her responsibility. She admitted that she knew the designs belonged to Imani and explained that Marcus had promised her fame, an international brand, and a large part of the money. She tried to present herself as a woman manipulated by an experienced man, but her own messages showed her enthusiasm and active participation. She also confessed that she had sent the provocative invitation because she wanted to see Imani defeated in the crowd. The prosecutor asked her why she had used the memory of another woman's mother in the interviews. Chantel was silent for a long moment and finally replied that she needed a story that would move people. That explanation, pronounced without understanding its cruelty, summarized her entire behavior. She assumed that any life could become promotional material as long as it generated attention. Marcus received the news of Chantel's collaboration with fury. He accused her of treason, forgetting that their relationship had begun precisely with one. His lawyers negotiated the handover of keys and data on foreign accounts, although he continued to try to minimize his responsibility. The legal process would last for months, and Imani knew she would not get an immediate conclusion. However, she had already achieved something that no future sentence could replace: stopping the sale, regaining control of the collection, and publicly proving authorship before the lie was consolidated. The divorce was granted without a private agreement. Imani gave up keeping the apartment in Buckhead because she did not want to live among rooms where every gesture had been used against her. She recovered her studio furniture, her records, and the machinery purchased with the workshop's funds. The rest could be sold to pay off debts. The second runway show was held 6 months later in a smaller space, illuminated by natural light. There was no red carpet full of celebrities or a giant poster. At the entrance, a table displayed sketch versions, fabric samples, and photos of the creative process, not as evidence of a crime, but as a tribute to the work. On each chair, there was the name of a seamstress, a pattern maker, an embroiderer, or an assistant who had contributed to the collection. When the lights went out, the screens did not first show Imani's face. An image of her hands, along with those of Brenda and Keisha, adjusting a garment, appeared. Then, photos of the entire team were projected. The public understood that Rebirth was no longer just the story of an author who reclaimed her name, but of the many women whose work had been made invisible. The dresses advanced down the runway in their original order. Horizon had recovered the drape designed by Imani. Root once again bore the hand embroidery that Chantel had attributed to a machine. Aurora appeared without the ribbon used to hide the initials. When the black dress arrived, the room fell silent. The structure inspired by the quilts caught the light from the windows and projected geometric shapes on the floor. Inside were still the IF initials, recreated with the same type of thread used years before. Next to them, Imani had added a small phrase that no one could read from the audience, but whose existence she explained at the end. No one can steal the story of who dares to tell it. She did not need to put her name in giant letters on the fabric. She had understood that a signature is not a defense born of fear, but an act of memory. When the show ended, Eleanor invited Imani to come out. She appeared with everyone from the workshop. The applause was not explosive at first. It grew gradually as the audience stood up. Imani looked at the faces of Brenda, Keisha, and the seamstresses and thought of her mother. For a moment, she imagined her sitting in the front row, watching the dress they had started together finally belong to whom it should belong. She did not talk about Marcus or Chantel. She thanked those who had kept the documents, told the truth, and refused to let fear decide for them. Then, she announced the opening of a new workshop called Franklin Atelier, where each piece would include the names of those who had participated in its creation. For her, that transparency was the deepest response to the system of silence used to rob her. A few weeks later, Imani returned to the Buckhead apartment for the last time. The rooms were almost empty, and the old studio seemed smaller, without fabrics or mannequins. She found under a table one of the 2 pieces of the ID card that Marcus had torn on the night of the first show. It must have fallen out of her purse while she was preparing the evidence. On the piece of plastic, the word guest was still visible. Imani smiled at the irony. For years, she had behaved like a guest in her own talent, waiting for the permission of a husband, an investor, or a more prominent figure. She kept the fragment, not as a memory of humiliation, but as proof of the journey taken. She closed the door and handed the keys to the person in charge of selling the property. The new workshop occupied an old restored printing press with high windows and wide tables. On the entrance, there were no photos or advertising phrases, only a simple sign with the name Imani Franklin. On the morning of the opening, Brenda placed the original sample notebook in a glass cabinet. Keisha organized the digital archive with protocols that prevented the modification of documents without leaving a trace. Jamal arrived with the confirmation that a large part of the diverted money had been located and could return to the workshop after the corresponding procedures. Imani was grateful for the news, although she no longer depended on it to continue. She had received enough orders to maintain the team for the first year. Rebirth, the collection Marcus wanted to use to expel her from her own story, had become the beginning of a life built without him. Before opening the doors to the public, Imani approached the first mannequin and adjusted a seam. Then she took a needle, a spool of bright thread, and embroidered her initials on the inside of a new jacket. She did it slowly, without hiding, and without thinking about who might try to erase them. Outside, there were clients, journalists, and young designers who had followed her case. Imani took a deep breath and opened the doors. She understood that justice did not only consist of seeing those who had betrayed her fall. It also meant reclaiming the right to create without asking for permission, trusting her own memory again, and turning what they had wanted to use to destroy her into the foundation of a different future. That talent could be copied for a time, a sketch could be stolen, a signature could be covered, and a lie could parade under hundreds of lights. But there was something that Marcus and Chantel never understood. The real creator does not just know the final shape of a work. They know every doubt, every mistake, every decision, and every wound that made it possible. They could wear her dresses, repeat her words, and even appropriate her memories. But they could never explain the path that connects a line drawn in silence with the final stitch. And as long as that path existed, Imani Franklin's name would continue to live in every thread.